Hey, y'all.
Morning, how we doing?
Good, yourself?
Good, good.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning. We will be starting our adult Bible study this morning. We're going to start at the Old Testament. If you don't have the chapter from the Old Testament storybook, there should be some in the back. We are continuing from last week, looking at the book of Ezekiel. But before we do so, we just want to start off with a word of prayer so we can have our mindset in the right place before we start our Bible study, and afterwards we'll have our worship service. So at this time, let's go to our Father in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning you've given us. We are grateful for the day we're able to see, for this changing weather. We are grateful that you kept us safe and we are here in your house, Father, gathered collectively. We're praying for those that are still on their way, that are traveling through this turbulent weather. We pray that you give them safe travel. And for us, Father, as we open up another your scripture, we pray that we be able to glean a lesson all those years that is spent from thousands of years ago. These individuals, Father, would be able to apply to our individual lives and be able to have a better perspective on things in life. Father, we pray for those that are not here for various reasons. We pray that you be with them throughout the week. If they're not here physically, if they're here online, we pray that they be able to focus on the things that are said and apply it as well. The individual lives as well. Thank you for all these blessings, Father. We pray that you be with us for the rest of this day and in all things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So we are continuing, as mentioned, in the book of Ezekiel. We'll be looking at all the major, all the prophets, and today we are continuing in that same lessons from past week, looking at the book of Ezekiel. The last week, Brother Ricardo did a good job of introducing us for the person that is Ezekiel. Today, we're continuing on looking at the significance of the date, right? And it is always important that we don't undercut the importance of the history aspect of it, because sometimes we look at the story, but we forget that these are real historical occurrences. And putting that in perspective gives us a mindset of the time period and looking at what how important certain periods are in history in application. So, and putting it in perspective, we looked at looked at how there were 12 tribes and the 10 tribes of Israel were carried off to Assyria. During this period that the Ezekiel has been written, it's been like 100 years since that time. Those 10 tribes that had ignored prophets after prophets of Amos, Hosea, and they all disappeared. And the sad thing about it is that the other two remaining tribes had multiple times where they have been seeing the consequences of not being with God. And the first one was the fact that those the 10 tribes were taken away, and that would have been a warning call to the two tribes that were still remaining. And sadly, that isn't, right? That's the tragedy of it all, is that all these prophets, right, that come over and over have the same message, but it is ignored just the same, right? There's something to say about like the level of stubbornness, right, of human nature, that we don't learn our lesson, right? There's the expression that history repeats itself, and the reason is because it has to, because nobody's listening. If everybody was listening, history wouldn't repeat, but since it's not being, nobody's listening, the history has to teach us again and again the same thing. And this is kind of the same aspect when we apply it to our individual lives, because the point of the Old Testament story is to not just look at the Old Testament story as in all those things that happened back then, but to apply it to our individual lives today, right? So, so like when we talked about the perspective, we looked at the perspective of the kings when we were doing the kings of Judah, right? We saw the levels of mindset that these kings had, which was aligned not to God but to themselves. And then we looked at on the prophetic side, looked at the prophets that were giving messages to these individuals, but a lot of the time we see that mindset that it just kind of backfires. Like continually, whenever these prophets are giving these warnings, people continue to ignore it. Right? We look at Isaiah, and sadly, after Isaiah, we think it get better, but things people just got more and more stubborn, more and more hard-headed. Right? The things that Isaiah preached, they wouldn't listen. Right? We talked about how they were set up with these prophets, and they ignored other prophets. We looked at Jeremiah, and his life was something of a depressing state itself, right? Because that's how he is looked at. Oh, it's just Jeremiah. It's kind of brushes off as a person who's just like a downer. Like whenever he would come by, he'd just be like, "Oh, it's Jeremiah coming again." Right? So, and it keeps happening and happening, and it's important to see different perspective of things. One of the things that's unique about Ezekiel, as Brother Carter mentioned last week, was that Ezekiel was one of the people that was taken in the first wave of captivity when Jerusalem was being overtaken by the king of Babylon. And this is foretold also, as in like this is not news. And the way it was done is that the first wave that was taken was mostly people that were the higher tier of society. So that would be all the aristocrats, individuals of specific craft, specific abilities. Those are all taken, and the only people that were left were the poor and stricken, because they would not rebel. There's no ability for them to fight back. And during that wave, we see that Ezekiel is also taken, right? And Ezekiel had a life that was destined to be, originally was destined to be one of priests, right? And the significance of that age is important, because you have to be around 30 to start your priestly duties, to be able to start your life as a priest. But sadly, at age 25 is when he is taken. And there's a reason for that. As we see that Ezekiel, although his preparation might be one of a priest, but his life is one that is calling of a prophet, right? And it is important that we know that it was at age 30 that he has his first vision, right? His first calling outside of priesthood, to be a prophet, to be a messenger. And looking at the history, it's very kind of tragic in a way, because we know how the story ends. We've seen it from the perspective when we look at the kings of Judah, that Jerusalem will fall, that all the buildup that has been happening, there's hope of certain times, right? Like we saw the hope when it comes to certain kings. We think that things are going to turn around, like Josiah is one of them. And it's important to know, specifically because we're talking about the dates, that Josiah is in that same time frame of these prophets of Jeremiah and Daniel, because sometimes when we look at stories, we don't see it consecrated, like layered at the same time. We see that, okay, this happens and this happens, but these things are happening simultaneously. And there is a sense of optimism that comes with King Josiah, because he's one of the ones that, if you recall, when we look at the kings of Judah, that he was did the cleaning of the temple, and that's when they found of the original 5 books of Moses during that time, right? That the level of worship had gotten so far away that that they had to find the book of Moses. Like, think of it like as if worship service and somebody has to find the Bible, right? Because worship service has gone so astray from what the original perspective was, the original meaning was, that the word itself is left in the cupboard. And this level of ignorance is also later on when Ezekiel has the vision where God is not in Jerusalem anymore. It says like the vision of God, like when he sees the vision of God in his throne, he's not on top of the tabernacle because God has left that place. Right? That's the message that the other prophets have also mentioned, is that there will be a point where there will be no return for you guys. As in, it won't be you guys that will be returning back to your city. It will be the next generation. Right? This is a tough lesson because Ezekiel has a similar message, right? And that's part of why there's a distinction in the first half of Ezekiel and the second half. Because first half is all the way to the point of that no return, where he continues to bring back all the previous times where the tribes have failed and the continued things going downward and downward for the remaining two tribes. There's a warning that is continually said over and over by Ezekiel, but there's a point where once he is taken out of captivity, once he is taken, he sees that there is a point where there is no return. And similarly, it's the same mindset that Moses had, right? Like when Moses was in the wilderness, there's the same mindset that they're never going to go reach the Holy Land. Like they themselves would be the next generation that would be, right? So that's the tragedy of it. And Ezekiel has a similar message and significance of the date is according to the same mindset. So let's go ahead and do the reading from the Old Testament survey book, looking at the date. And then if there's any comments, any thoughts, you can raise hands and we will, those things. Okay. So the date. It says, it is likely, the likely date for the prophetic ministry of Ezekiel was 592 to 570 BC. Ezekiel's prophetic ministry falls into two periods. The first included the years 592 to 586 BC, during which the prophet's message directed towards Jerusalem consisted of reiterated warnings and symbolic actions designed to bring Judah to repentance and bring to her historic faith in God. The second period, which began in the year of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by Nebuchadnezzar, included the year 586 to 570 BC. In the course of these years, Ezekiel was a pastor to the exiles and the messenger of comfort and hope. It says he was a contemporary to Jeremiah and Daniel. It says Jeremiah preached to the Jews in Judah before Jerusalem's fall. Daniel spoke God's message to the royal courts of the kings of Babylon, and Ezekiel was prophet to the exiles in Babylon before and after the fall of Jerusalem. So there's a good significance of the three individuals, the three prophets, and the specific place that they are in, right? Like they're contemporary, as in like they're all at the same time, growing at the same time amidst the other prophets as well. But there is a specific audience for each of these prophets. Like Jeremiah, we looked at before, he was speaking throughout his 40 years ministry to the individuals that were in Jerusalem. He was that final piece of the message of warning to these people, saying, hey, it's going to happen. The city's going to fall, right? And it's not even like the tribes anymore, because it wasn't like there were two tribes left, because they had completely befallen to the political turbulence during that period, that it was only left that one city, Jerusalem. Like everything else had gone. Like no 10 tribes, no 2 tribes. It's just Jerusalem that is left. And it had continued to get raided and pillaged. And Jeremiah was the person to speak to those people that were in that, going through that, right? And that's why he has a difficult period of long depression, because he's slowly seeing the consequence, but he isn't able to do much. And there is a reason that we need to see the importance of Jeremiah speaking to the people, is because the people's heart had turned away from God, right? And we talked about Josiah, and he being like, when he found those 5 books, he realized how far things had gotten, and he set up so many rules to break down, the high places and establish God's temple. But the problem is that if the individuals have their heart turned away from God, like, the rules is not going to make a difference, right? It's the same idea of if you are forcing your children to go on a certain path, but their heart is against it, right? It has to come from the individuals, because the rule doesn't make much difference if you are not, if you don't see the significance of it. Like, in the same manner that you should see the value of the life you're living as a Christian versus as a burden of, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that, right? If you don't see the value of it intrinsically, then all of this is for naught. And this is the mindset that Jeremiah had, is because he was speaking to the people to change their heart to God. Because that is always the thing that is actually going to make a change, where if the people are already living a certain life, then the rules won't be a burden because they're already living that. Right? But if it's the other way around, where the rules are enforced so you don't do it, then your heart is always acting against it. This is important because the perspective is different. In Daniel's case, he's speaking God's message to the royal courts of the kings in Babylon, and we'll see when we talk about Daniel that there's a different perspective. Ezekiel, what we're reading now, is a prophet to the exiles in Babylon before and after the fall of Jerusalem, as in he was the people that were in like refugee camps. Like, he was part of those first wave of people. Daniel was also part of the first wave of people that were taken in captivity. So, in a significance to see that all these prophets in contemporary nature, they have different audience, and the messages reflect that. So, any thoughts or any comments on the significance of the dates before we move on to the next aspect?
Yeah, I think you made a really good point about the amount of changes that Josiah tried to do, and how he worked really hard to try to get the people to turn back to God. And all of these prophets they're all doing the same thing. But the point that you made that really kind of stuck with me is, you can do as many changes and you can do as many things as you want and force people to do stuff, but if the heart is not set on what God wants them to do, then all of those things pretty much are in vain, right? I remember a couple of weeks ago we were talking, that yes, they were worshiping, but they weren't worshiping fully. They weren't worshiping intently. They were worshiping with their hearts. Some of them were worshiping two gods, right? They were worshiping God, and then they were worshiping the other gods. We also touched on, like, the influence which the Babylonians did. The Babylonians impacted the heart of these people, and so the kings, the prophets, as they're doing these things, and in Ezekiel, there's a lot of symbolic things that he's doing to try to bring the people back, right? And the people are seeing this, and you would think by seeing, like, your heart would be impacted by it, but their hearts were so hardened on sinning against God and doing what they wanted to do, that no matter what kind of physical changes and outward things that they were seeing, it didn't impact them. That's how far gone that they were from God. So, like, the heart is where the issue lies.
Yeah. And it's important to see that there's a purpose for God to choose the next generation, like almost like a clean slate. And the sad part about it is that it keeps happening over and over, that God has to keep saying this is no good. We gotta start again with the next generation, right? And sometimes it's understandable with people itself that that you might not be able to relate or reach somebody who has already lived a life in a certain mindset, that they're more resilient to change, right? But if you are a young person, then you are more receptive to that change because you have not been swayed by the evils, right? You're not been swayed by the things. That's why it's so important that when you are in a young age, that you have your heart turned towards God, right? Because that's a pure heart. That is not one that is forced to do it, right? But that is one that is willing to do so for their own, for their own intrinsic reasons. And speaking to that mindset of the Babylonians, right? Like, and this is so foretold, as in, like, literally, if we could look back during King Hezekiah, there was like when Hezekiah was ill, there was the party from Babylon that is sent, and Hezekiah shows them all of these places of the temple, and the prophet mentions to Hezekiah that all of these things you're going to lose because you're showing these things to the enemy. As in, this is like a thing that is coming to place, right? And sadly, like, all of these things kind of comes into fruition. That all these things that were warned about from all the way from the beginning is continually, slowly but surely taking place. And every time there's some level of hopefulness, there's always something that goes awry and doubles down. So, yeah, as far as the significance in the dates, we definitely see the importance of Ezekiel's ministry. And speaking of that, of how corrupt it had gotten, Ezekiel has visions of the temple after he's already in exile, and he sees that there's so many other gods that is being worshipped in the temple, right? That's the level of corruption, and that's why it's the heart that is important, because it's so misaligned. As in, there's so many other points that your heart is attached to, that you cannot be wholly focused on God, especially when during worship, right? You're focused on so many other things.
Yeah. I just wanted to touch on this point just a little bit longer because like it's so important. In Matthew 15, 19, where Jesus here is speaking. Like, this is Jesus saying this. He says, out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person. And then he goes on to talk about eating, but it just shows you again, the heart is where, like, these people kind of messed up, and like they were hardened. Like, if you remember, when God was freeing these people, like, what did he do to Pharaoh? He hardened his heart, because he knew that once you do that, then, like, he, no matter what Pharaoh sees, I mean, after he sees plague after plague after plague, but yet he refuses to obey and let them go and stuff like that. So, like, the heart again is just so important. And then in the same book that we're studying here, the book of Ezekiel, and Ezekiel 36, verse 26. Again, God speaking here, he says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. So again, the heart, like, was corrupted. Again, no matter what else that they were doing, they were seeing, like, the heart just refused to turn back to God. So God says, I'm gonna give you a new heart. You said starting over. Like, we gotta do this over. I'm not gonna write it on your doorpost anymore. I'm not gonna write it for you to see. Like, these prophets are not gonna be doing signs and miracles and stuff like that. right now for you, but I'm gonna write it on your heart so that way you can obey me fully.
Yeah, and that's always a struggle when it comes to trying to fight against your nature, right? That's mentioned by so many apostles of that wanting to do one thing, but having to do another, right? Because that's a struggle when, especially like when you have the world that is raising you in a certain way, but you have to fight against that nature. But sometimes it's not natural in the sense that you have to actively discipline yourself, right? To act against that comes naturally to you, right? And it's very contrasting if you were to examine your life, how you are here versus how you are in the world, right? If if you have this two-sided face where during the Sundays you are one set, but during the rest of the week you are another, then that kind of defeats the point. That is the same mindset as having to force somebody to observe the Passover but not understanding the significance of it, right? Or what that means behind it. It's the same mindset of coming to church because it's a Sunday versus understanding the value of coming to church for the week, right? When you're not here, is there something that is affecting you, right? Because that's the heart that Brother Ricardo is talking about, is that we saw the nature of these kings, where we see that continually there's strife, where you think that all the things that is accomplished is because of your own volition. That's the corruption of power. But in the individual mindset of individual people that are living in the place, the same level of corruption occurs when there is your environment is affected, right? When your environment is geared around, being away from God, right? It's hard for you to yourself be able to make a change individually. So yeah, let's do a reading of the setting, and then we can answer some questions, and so we can conclude for the day. So the setting. It says politically, previously to the exile, says God refused to defend Judah against Babylon because of her sins. Says other nations refused to come to Judah's aid militarily. It says during the exile, the Jews were captives living in Babylon. And it says the Babylonians did not treat the Jews as slaves. They were allowed to buy land, enter into business, and accumulate wealth. Some, such as Daniel, attained high political offices with the Babylonian government. So there's a significance of how the Jews were treated, and part of the reason why after the fall of Jerusalem there is a difficulty in the next generation of the Israelites to go back to their home nation is because of this, right? Is because they have made new lives to be able to return back, right, to their home. And that is difficult because the remnants of it is seen today, as there are places in all over the Mediterranean where there are Jewish people that are not, there are Jewish descent, but they're not affiliated with the Jewish people that are back in Israel. So yeah, there's a historical side of it as well, and there's a reason for the continuing furtherance of the people, because there's a line that is coming. There's a hope that is coming that Jeremiah mentions, not from the people that have failed, but from the next generation that will continue. Religiously, it says previously to the exile, even after witnessing two previous deportations to Babylon, the people remain impenitent. We continue to go even deeper into wickedness and idolatry. Two common false notions existed during this period. One is those left behind in Jerusalem thought their kinsmen who had been deported were probably being justly punished for their sins, while they themselves, since they remained in the city, were still in God's favor. That those already exiled through their captivity would end quickly, and that God would never allow his chosen city, Jerusalem, to burn. And lastly, both of these ideas were proven false when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem, burning it to the ground and massacring its citizens. So we looked at how there's always like these mental 4D chess that we keep playing where we just fight the need to examine ourselves. We always say, oh, it's happening because X, Y, and Z. It's happening because, but we don't really look back and see it's happening because of me, right? And that is the flaw from the pauper to the king all the way, where if you forget to see perspective in life, right, then you will see the consequences of having a lack of that perspective. Because you will be destroyed by your own hubris in a way. And in this scenario, the people continually think that they will be exempt, right? And that is a warning to us as Christians to not have that same mindset, right? Because we're saying, oh, it's you who's a non-Christian, you're the one that's condemned, but sometimes we're judging more others, but failing to look back at ourselves to see the consequences of the action. And a lot of the time, it's always when things are going wrong. Like when things are going wrong, it always is like, why me? Nobody's ever saying, oh, it's because of me. It's always saying it's because of, God is doing X or God is doing Y, but nobody really says it's because of my actions that have caused the things. And this lack is very, very harmful because it continues to build. It continues to build to the next generation, it continues to build an opportunity for you to change when you have the time. Because after a while, you won't have that time, right? If you keep blaming other individuals but not changing your ways, there will come a time where it's too late. You can't keep blaming everybody else, because the consequences of you failing to act but just blaming other people is going to have consequences of itself, right? And the second half of it is seeing yourself as holy because of certain positions or certain, your family, whatever mindset you have. Right here, yours because they were in this chosen city, and it is true. It is a very significant. You see throughout history all the things that the people have gone through to get to this one place. You would think that there would be, that significance, and there is. But you were forgetting that once you are not God's people, the city is not for you. Like, that's not your place, because you are not of God's people. And in this scenario, the people that continue to act against God, they were no longer God's people because God had chosen the Babylonians, right, as a hand. As in, the enemies had become God's people during this period because they were the ones that were winning. They were the ones that were succeeding. And the whole city being burned to the ground is a consequence of that, of you thinking that because Jerusalem is that city, and Jerusalem will be reborn, right? But not for those people that have turned their hearts away from God. And the last thing it says, during the exile, the people enjoyed religious freedom. During this period, they forever gave up idolatry. So they sought out the law of God, and it was most likely during this time that synagogue worship was inaugurated. So this is one of those things where we cannot see the good that is going to come from something bad, right? Because that's the tragedy of Jeremiah during the Zedekiah's reign. The last king was like, you got to stop. Fighting is making it worse. In a way, you having been taken in captivity in Babylon will be good for you. That is a thing that we continually fight against if there's something negative coming for our own good, right? As children, right, when parents give you punishment or give you any kind of discipline, it's discipline. That's right. Give you discipline. There's always a resistance because you don't have that foresight to know that this is for your own benefit, right? And the people that were in captivity, in a way that took them outside of themselves to see all this thing that I think is me is not me, but that is given to me. I think sometimes people get in that mindset whenever it comes to things that is corruptible, like power or like wealth, right? Where you think because you have received this honor, that you don't see this as something of a privilege that is given to you, but you think of it as something that is earned by yourself out of your own volition. And it keeps you from having clarity in your life. In this scenario, they had a false clarity of thinking, oh, it's because of this God, but this God is because of things that is not that is because of me, and that kind of mires your head when it comes to making decisions because you are not clear in who you are aligning yourself to, in who you are giving your praises to. And in this scenario, it says that synagogue worship was inaugurated, and this will be fundamental to the people going forward, right? That this difficult period is going to be one that is more positive than they can know. So that there's a significance in the setting and the date of in the book of Ezekiel. Is there any thoughts or any comments?
People learn under stress. Righteous people are affected by unrighteousness, and when you have a lot of it, it puts you in a state of hope and despair because you get tired of defending the minority thought process, and that's just a human flaw. People get tired of doing good things; they simply do. Now, through Jeremiah, God told them what was going to happen, and it did. And the unrighteous people were killed by the Babylonians. But the effect of that, so many years of bad leadership, took that snap out of them. So God had to rejuvenate the covenant. He had to get something to them to get them back on the mindset, back on that track of thinking about who He is. It's kind of like the 40-year wandering.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like you those that worshiped the golden calf and took the side of the golden calf was done away with. But it still affected everybody else because they all came from the same place.
Mm-hmm.
So once you miss a few Sundays and you get away from the norm, then you justify sinful behavior because there's nothing else you don't surround yourself with good things to listen to, therefore you lose your hope.
Mm-hmm.
So God has to retrain you through certain circumstances. And one thing about losing everything, it disciplines you and gives you hope again. Because you have nothing. You're starting anew. But although God is setting them up to succeed in a foreign land, that is going to affect them because they can't see spiritually. You know, they're gonna think that it's a cushion life outside of Canaan, outside of the place they need to be. And although God is universal, you know, God can be God anywhere you are. God still wants you to affect unrighteousness with righteousness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's always that difficulty with people when it comes to understanding that through strife you are hardened, right? That's a hard lesson. That, like during the wilderness, that was a good example because during the wilderness they don't see that as there's a reason behind it, right? And all the times where things are taken away from you, right? When you are made like as clean slate as it possible, you don't see that as a benefit because you're only focusing on the things that is lost, right? And perspective is always important because there are people that have persecution for what we're doing right now, right? And in a sense, comfort is making us a little stagnant. In a sense, we're not really challenging ourselves to see, hey, would we still gather if there were bounties out for a gathering, right? Like, does that show how do you buffet yourself if you are not challenging yourself, right? So yeah, so a lot of good thoughts, a lot of good comments. Unless there was anything else, I know we have to go over the questions, but we're kind of short on time, so we're going to continue that next week when we look at the message of Ezekiel. But unless there's any thoughts or any comments at this time, let's go to our Father in prayer after which we'll have a brief recess before we start our worship. Let's go to our Father in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you once again for this morning, for your blessings. We are grateful for the opportunity, Father, to open up your word this morning, to look at your prophet Ezekiel, and to look at his life, and to see the same lesson that we apply to our lives today, Father, that we ourselves are hard-headed, and our heart is tested and heart is diverged. We pray, Father, that throughout this week that we continue to realize that you are all, and that you is all, and that we pray that we be able to turn our hearts to you and remain there and not be distracted by the things of the world, Father. We're praying for the worship service after which we will be having, and that we will reiterate the same idea of love and mercy and grace that you have bestowed upon us, which will humble us, Father, for the week that is coming up, to know that you are all, and that you give us all, and Father, we're nothing without you. Father, we're praying for those that are traveling here on this way. We pray for their safe travels throughout this changing weather and the rainy weather. We pray that we as a collective will be benefited, Father, to this worship service, and that we will be attuned with you, Father, throughout. In all things, Father, we pray that you be with us, and we thank you for all things. All these things we pray unto you and your Son, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Let's all say amen.
Amen.